The rain had been falling since midday and it showed no sign of stopping. Walter sat at his workbench with a small lamp burning beside him and a broken music box open in front of him. The gears inside were rusted and two of the tiny teeth had snapped off the main wheel. He was working slowly the way he always worked, with steady hands and no rush. Outside, the street was wet and empty. The shops across the road had all closed early. The baker had pulled his shutters. The cloth seller had packed his cart. Ashvale was quiet, the way border towns always got when the weather turned heavy. Walter did not mind the quiet. He had worked in quiet for most of his life. His shop was small but tidy. The walls had shelves from floor to ceiling, and the shelves were filled with toys in every state of repair. Some were finished and waiting to be picked up. Some were halfway done. Some were just brought in and still needed looking at. There were wooden horses and painted soldiers and cloth dolls with button eyes and little boats with cloth sails and boxes that played music when you opened them. Walter had fixed all kinds. If it was broken and it had once made a child happy, Walter would find a way to put it back together. He had been doing this for a long time. Long enough that the children he fixed toys for when he first opened the shop had grown up and were now bringing in toys for their own children. He was not a young man anymore. His hair had gone gray at the sides and his knees ached when the weather was cold. But his hands were still good and his eyes were still sharp, and that was what mattered most in his line of work. He was pressing a gear back into place when the door opened. The cold air came in first. Then the sound of rain. Then small footsteps on the wooden floor. Walter looked up. A young dragon hatchling was standing just inside the doorway. She was small, no taller than his waist, with pale green scales that were dark and wet from the rain. Her wings were folded tight against her sides, dripping steadily onto his floor. Her copper-colored eyes moved slowly around the shop, taking in the shelves and the tools and the rows of toys, and then they settled on Walter. She was holding something in both her front claws, pressed carefully against her chest the way a child holds something they are afraid of dropping. It was a small wooden bird. Blue and gold paint, mostly worn away now. Wire wings, one of which was bent at a bad angle. A small carved tail that had cracked down the middle. And a little wooden stand that had snapped clean off at the base. Walter looked at the bird. Then he looked at her. She was alone. No parent behind her. No older sibling waiting at the door. Just a small hatchling standing in a stranger's shop in the rain, holding a broken toy and watching him with careful eyes. He set down his tools and straightened up slowly. She walked to the counter. It came up past her chin. She had to rise up slightly on her back legs to set the bird down on the surface, and she did it with both claws, gently, like she was placing something precious on an altar. Then she stood back and looked at him. Walter picked the bird up and held it under the lamp. The wire in the bent wing had not snapped, just been pushed badly out of shape. That was good. Wire could be bent back. The crack in the tail was clean, which meant wood glue and a clamp overnight would hold it well. The stand needed a new dowel, which he had plenty of in the back. None of it was beyond fixing. Most things were not, if you looked at them the right way. He turned the bird over once more and then set it down carefully on his side of the counter. "Come back tomorrow morning," he said. "It will be ready." The hatchling looked at the bird. Then she looked at him. She was very still. "You will fix it?" she said. Her voice was quiet, small, like she was not quite sure she had the right to be asking. "That is what I do," Walter said. He did not ask her name. He did not ask who her parents were or where she lived or how she had come to be out alone in the rain at this hour. Those were not his questions to ask. She had come in with a broken thing and he had told her he would fix it. That was the whole of it. He reached under the counter for his glue pot and set it near the lamp to warm. He found a small clamp in the drawer beside his knee and set that out too. He pulled a short length of dowel from the shelf behind him and held it up against the broken base to check the size. When he looked up again, the hatchling was still standing there, watching him work. Then after a moment she turned and walked back to the door. She pushed it open with one small claw and stepped out into the rain without another word. Walter watched the door close behind her. He sat with the bird under the lamp for a moment, just looking at it. Small thing. Someone had painted it carefully once. Blue for the body, gold for the wings. Someone had loved it. He picked up his smallest brush, dipped it in the glue and got to work. Outside, the rain kept falling over Ashvale. Inside, the lamp burned warm and steady, and Walter worked on through the evening without hurrying, the way he always did. She came back the next morning, just as Walter had said she should. He had the bird ready on the counter when she arrived. The bent wing had been straightened and reset. The cracked tail had been glued and clamped overnight and was now solid. A new dowel had been fitted into the base, sanded smooth and sealed. He had even touched up the paint where it had worn away the worst, using the closest blues and golds he had in his small set of paint jars. It was not perfect. It was old and it had lived a full life. But it stood straight again and the wings sat the way they were meant to sit. The hatchling picked it up with both claws and looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then she looked at Walter. He nodded once. She turned and left. Walter went back to his workbench and thought nothing more of it. Then she came back the following week. This time she was carrying a small toy horse, carved from pale wood, with a crack running down its left front leg. The leg was not fully broken but it was close, and whoever had been playing with it had wrapped a piece of string around the crack which had not helped at all. She set it on the counter the same way she had set the bird down. Carefully. With both claws. Walter unwrapped the string, looked at the crack under the lamp and told her to come back in 2 days. She came back in 2 days. The horse was ready. She picked it up, looked at it and left. Walter noticed she had not asked the price either time. He had not offered one. It had not felt like the right thing to do. The week after that she brought a puppet. It was a cloth figure, shaped roughly like a small knight, with a painted wooden head and 4 strings attached to a wooden crossbar above. 2 of the strings had snapped and the cloth body had torn along one side seam. Walter restitched the seam with strong thread and tied new strings, matching the length carefully so the puppet moved the way it was supposed to move. When she came to collect it she held the crossbar and made the little knight walk across the counter, watching its feet. Something close to a smile crossed her face, though she did not say anything. Then she left again. Walter stood at the counter after she had gone and looked at the space where she had been standing. He realized he still did not know her name. The week after that she came in with nothing. No broken toy. No cracked piece of wood. No torn cloth or bent wire. She simply pushed open the door, came inside and stood in the middle of the shop looking at the shelves. Walter watched her from his bench. He did not ask what she wanted. He did not ask if she was lost or if she needed something. He just reached to the side of the room and pulled over the small 3-legged stool he kept near the wall and set it a short distance from his bench. She looked at the stool. Then she walked over and sat on it. Walter went back to work. He was repairing a small clockwork beetle that evening, a beautiful little thing with a brass shell and 6 jointed legs that was supposed to walk in circles when you wound the key in its back. 2 of the legs had seized up and the spring inside was wound too tight and needed careful releasing. It was delicate work. He worked slowly with a very fine pick and a pair of narrow pliers and he did not speak. The hatchling sat on the stool and watched. She watched his hands move. She watched him hold the beetle up to the light and tilt it to see the inside better. She watched him release the spring one careful click at a time. She did not fidget. She did not make noise. She simply sat and watched with those copper-colored eyes moving wherever his hands moved. Walter found that he did not mind. Most people who came into the shop talked too much. They explained the problem 3 times and then explained it again. They leaned over the counter and pointed at things. They asked questions while he was trying to concentrate. The hatchling did none of that. She just sat quietly and let him work, and the shop felt no different with her in it than it did without her, except perhaps a little warmer. When the beetle was done he set it on the counter and wound the key. It walked in a slow circle, all 6 legs moving together, brass shell catching the lamplight. The hatchling leaned forward on the stool and watched it complete its circle. Then she leaned back again. Walter put the beetle in the collection box for its owner. After a while he got up and put the kettle on the small iron stove in the back room. He brought out 2 cups and poured one for himself and set the other on the edge of the bench nearest the stool. He did not say anything about it. He just set it there and went back to work. She looked at the cup. Then she picked it up with both claws and drank from it slowly. They sat like that until the lamp began to burn low. Then she got up from the stool, set the cup back on the bench and walked to the door. She looked back at him once before she pushed it open. Walter gave a small nod. She left. He sat for a moment in the quiet shop with his cooling cup and looked at the empty stool. Then he got up, washed both cups and locked up for the night. The next week he had the kettle warm before she arrived. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the old dragon came to see him. Walter had stepped outside for a moment to shake the wood dust from his apron. The street was busy that day. The market was running and there were people moving between the stalls and carts lined up along the road selling bread and cloth and vegetables. The sun was out for the first time in several days and Ashvale felt lighter because of it. He was about to go back inside when a large shadow fell across the doorway. The dragon was old. Very old. His scales had gone from whatever color they once were to a deep weathered gray, like old stone left out in too many winters. He was large, much larger than the hatchling, and he moved with the slow, careful weight of something that had lived a very long time and no longer needed to hurry. His eyes were dark gold and they were fixed on Walter with an expression that was hard to read. He stopped just in front of the shop door. Walter looked up at him and waited. "You are the toy mender?" the elder said. It was not a question. "I am," Walter said. The elder looked at the shop front for a moment, then looked back at Walter. He spoke quietly, just low enough that the people passing on the street could not hear. "The hatchling who comes here," he said. "The small one with pale green scales." Walter said nothing. He just listened. "You do not know who she is?" the elder said. "I know she brings broken things," Walter said. "And that she drinks her tea without sugar." The elder studied him for a moment. Then he exhaled slowly through his nose, a long breath that carried the faint smell of old smoke. "Her name is Sarah," he said. "She is the last living heir to the dragon throne." Walter did not move. "There is a war," the elder continued. "It has been going on for 3 years now. 3 noble houses are fighting for the throne and each of them knows that whoever holds the heir holds the strongest claim. She was brought to Ashvale when she was very young. Hidden here. Away from the courts and the soldiers and the people who would use her." He paused and looked at Walter steadily. "Very few people know she is here. I am telling you because you have become part of her days whether you intended to or not. She talks about your shop. She talks about watching you work. For a child who speaks very little, she speaks about this place more than anywhere else." Walter looked at the ground for a moment. Then he looked back up at the elder. "What is it you want me to do?" he asked. "Distance yourself," the elder said simply. "It is not safe for her to be attached to any one place or any one person here. If the wrong people come looking and they find a connection, they will follow it. A child's habits can be mapped. Her routines can be tracked. Every visit she makes here is a thread that could be pulled." He said it without cruelty. He said it the way a person says something they believe is true and necessary, even if it is not easy. Walter nodded slowly. He looked down the street in the direction she usually came from when she visited. Past the baker, past the fountain, past the end of the row where the road curved and you could not see further. She would come from that direction in about an hour, the way she always did on Tuesday afternoons. "I understand what you are telling me," Walter said. The elder watched him. "And I am grateful you came," Walter added. "It took something to do that." The elder gave a slow nod. Then he turned and walked away down the street, moving between the market stalls with that slow, careful weight, and within a minute he had disappeared into the crowd. Walter stood at the door of his shop for a while. He thought about what the elder had said. He thought about the war he had heard mentioned in pieces over the past year, fragments of news that drifted into border towns the way all news did, slowly and without much detail. He thought about noble houses and thrones and the kind of people who sent soldiers into small towns looking for children. Then he went back inside. He hung his apron back on its hook. He sat down at the bench. He looked at the work in front of him, a small doll with a cracked porcelain face that needed very careful handling, and he picked up his finest tool and got to work. After about 20 minutes he got up and walked to the door. He turned the lock over from the inside, the small brass one that he usually only used when he was closed. He turned it back the other way. Unlocked. He went back to the bench. He was not going to lock her out. He had thought about what the elder said and he understood the concern and he did not think the elder was wrong to say it. But a child did not become dangerous to know. Powerful people made other people dangerous to know. That was a different thing entirely. The danger did not belong to her. It belonged to the situation around her, and that situation was not her fault. She was a child who came to his shop and sat on a stool and drank tea and watched him work without making a sound. She brought broken things and trusted him to fix them. That was all she was in his shop. That was all she needed to be. He was not going to turn her away because powerful people were behaving badly somewhere far from Ashvale. He worked steadily through the next hour. Then the door opened and the small bell above it rang once, and he heard light footsteps on the wooden floor. Walter did not look up right away. He just reached to the side and moved the stool a little closer to the bench the way he always did. "Kettle is warm," he said. "Cups are on the shelf." They came on a Thursday. Walter heard them before he saw them. The sound of heavy hooves on the stone road, more than a few, moving at a pace that was not casual. Then voices, sharp and loud, the kind that expected to be listened to. Then the market outside going quiet in that particular way markets go quiet when something is wrong. He stood up from his bench and looked through the window. 6 soldiers on horseback were moving slowly down the main street. They wore dark armor with a silver mark on the chest that Walter did not recognize. Not town guards. Not border patrol. Something else. They were stopping at each shop front, and one of them was doing the talking while the others watched the street with their hands resting near their weapons. Walter watched them for a moment. Then he heard the small bell above his door ring. He turned around. Sarah was already inside, pressed against the wall beside the door, her wings flat and her eyes wide. She had seen them before she came in. She was breathing fast and her pale green scales had gone slightly darker the way they did when she was frightened. She was looking at Walter with an expression he had not seen on her face before. He had seen her curious. He had seen her calm. He had seen her almost smile at the puppet walking across the counter. He had never seen her scared. He did not ask questions. He did not say anything at all. He just crossed the shop in a few steps, lifted the heavy cloth that hung along the front of his workbench and looked at her. She looked at the space under the bench. Then she looked at him. He nodded once. She folded her wings as tight as they would go and crawled in. Walter let the cloth fall back down and straightened up. He walked to his bench, sat on his stool, picked up the nearest tool and went back to work as though nothing had changed. His hands were steady. He made them steady. That was something he had learned a long time ago, that the hands could be made to do what the mind told them even when the chest was doing something else entirely. His chest was doing quite a lot at that moment. But his hands moved slowly and evenly over the small mechanical bird he had been working on all morning, turning it carefully, not rushing. 2 minutes later the door opened. The soldier who came in was tall and broad and filled most of the doorway. He had his helmet on but the visor was up. His eyes moved around the shop quickly, the way a person looks at a room when they are searching for something specific. Toy shop, the soldier said mostly to himself. Repair shop, Walter said without looking up. I fix them. I do not sell them. The soldier looked at him. Walter kept working. We are looking for a young dragon, the soldier said. A hatchling. Pale green scales. She would have been seen in this area. I get a few young ones in here, Walter said. He set down the bird and picked up a small brush. Parents bring them when something gets broken. Comes with the work. This one would have been alone, the soldier said. No parents. Small. Copper-colored eyes. Walter looked up at him then, with the expression of a man trying to be helpful. Copper eyes, he repeated. I cannot say I have noticed the eye color specifically. I mostly notice what they hand me across the counter. The soldier stepped further into the shop. He looked at the shelves. He looked at the workbench. His eyes passed across the hanging cloth along the front of it without stopping. Walter watched him look around and said nothing. Another soldier appeared in the doorway behind the first. Anything? The second one said. Old man fixes toys, the first soldier said. Walter did not react to that. He just waited. The first soldier looked at him again. Walter met his eyes and held them without blinking and without any change in his face. He had nothing to hide. He was a toy mender. He had been sitting at this bench for more years than these soldiers had probably been alive. There was nothing in this shop except broken things waiting to be made whole. He let his face say all of that without saying a word of it. The soldier looked around the shop one more time. Then he turned and walked out. The door closed. Walter did not move for a full minute. He sat at the bench and listened to the sounds outside. The hooves moved on down the street. The voices got further away. The market slowly came back to life. A voice here, a cartwheel there, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary afternoon returning piece by piece. He set down his brush. He lifted the cloth along the front of the bench. Sarah was curled tight in the space beneath, her wings wrapped around herself, her copper eyes looking out at him from the dark. He held out his hand. She took it and crawled out slowly. She stood up and straightened her wings and looked at the door for a moment. Then she looked at Walter. He was already moving to the back room. He came back with 2 cups and set them on the bench and poured from the kettle that had been sitting warm on the stove. He put 1 cup near the stool and sat back down on his own seat and picked up the mechanical bird again. Sarah did not sit down right away. She stood and looked at him. Why did you do that? She said. It came out soft and slow like she was still working out how to ask it. Walter set the bird down and looked at her. No child gets left behind in my shop, he said. He said it the way he said most things. Quietly. Simply. Without making anything large out of it. Sarah stood there a moment longer. Then she sat on the stool and picked up her cup and held it in both claws and said nothing more. Outside, the sound of hooves faded completely and was gone. 10 years is a long time. Walter's hair had gone fully gray now, not just at the sides but all the way through. His knees ached more than they used to and he had taken to keeping a small cushion on his stool to make the long hours at the bench a little easier. His eyes had weakened enough that he now wore a pair of thin wire glasses when doing fine work, and he had to hold things a little closer to the lamp than before. But his hands were still good. That was the thing he was most grateful for. Every morning he would flex them slowly before starting work, checking that the steadiness was still there, and every morning it was. A little slower perhaps. A little more careful. But still good. Still capable of the small and precise movements that the work demanded. The shop looked much the same as it always had. The shelves were still full. The workbench was still cluttered in the organized way that only made sense to Walter. The small iron stove in the back still kept the kettle warm through the day. The little bell above the door still rang every time someone came in. Ashvale had grown around the shop. New buildings had gone up on the east side of town. The market had expanded and now ran 3 days a week instead of one. There were more people on the streets than there used to be, more children, more noise, more life. It was a good town. It had always been a good town. The war in the Dragon Courts had ended 2 years ago. The news had come to Ashvale the way all big news came, slowly and in pieces, until enough pieces had arrived that the shape of the whole thing became clear. One house had won. The throne had a ruler. The fighting was over. Walter had heard the news, nodded, and gone back to work. He had not heard anything of Sarah since the soldiers came. She had stopped visiting the shop not long after that day. He had understood why. The elder had warned him about threads that could be pulled, and perhaps those around her had decided the visits needed to stop. He had not been angry about it. He had not been hurt. He had simply left the stool beside the bench where it was and kept the kettle warm out of habit for a few weeks and then eventually accepted that she was not coming back. He thought about her sometimes. Not with worry, just with the quiet wondering that comes when someone passes through your life and leaves a mark without meaning to. He hoped she was well. He hoped the people keeping her safe had done their job. He was thinking about none of this on the particular Thursday morning when the envoy arrived. He was working on a small puppet, restringing it with new cord, when he heard something outside that made him look up. Not hooves this time. Something more formal. A procession of some kind. He could hear the street going quiet the same way it had gone quiet 10 years ago, but differently. Not with fear. With something closer to awe. He stood up and looked through the window. There were 6 dragons moving down the main street in a formal line, wearing deep blue cloth across their shoulders with a gold mark that Walter did not recognize but which clearly meant something important because every person on the street had stopped moving entirely. At the front of the line was a younger dragon carrying a flat wooden case, sealed with dark wax. They stopped outside Walter's shop. The younger dragon looked up at the sign above the door. Then he came inside. Walter sat back down on his stool. The dragon placed the flat wooden case on the counter and looked at Walter with a formal expression. "Walter of Ashvale," he said. "Toy mender." "That is me," Walter said. "A letter," the dragon said. "From the throne." Walter looked at the case for a moment. Then he reached over and picked it up. It was lighter than it looked. The seal on the front was pressed deep into dark red wax. He did not recognize the official mark, but below it, pressed small and to the side the way an afterthought sometimes gets added at the last moment, was a second mark. A small bird with spread wings. Walter was very still for a moment. Then he broke the seal and opened the case. Inside were 2 things. The first was a rolled document, thick and formal, covered in careful script and bearing an official stamp at the bottom. He unrolled it far enough to read the heading. It was a royal decree. Full protected status for Ashvale under the crown. Trade rights. Border protections. The kind of document that small border towns spent generations hoping for and almost never received. He set it carefully to one side. The second thing was a folded piece of paper. Plain. No official stamp. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was larger than he expected, more assured, the handwriting of someone who had grown into themselves. But he knew it. He could not have explained how he knew it because he had never seen her write before. He just knew. It was short. 3 sentences and then 4 words at the bottom. The 3 sentences thanked him. Not for hiding her. Not for the soldiers. For the stool beside the bench and the warm cup, and never once asking her to be anything other than a child in a toy shop. And then at the bottom, in letters slightly larger than the rest, 4 words. The wing still holds. Walter sat with the letter in his hands for a long time. Then he looked up at the shelf above the window. At the far left end, where the light from outside caught it in the mornings, the small blue and gold bird was standing on its repaired base with its wire wings straight and its painted tail whole. Still standing. After all this time. He folded the letter carefully and held it in both hands and looked at the bird for a long while. Then he smiled. It was a small smile. Quiet. The kind that does not need anything added to it. He set the letter down gently beside his tools, picked up the puppet he had been working on and went back to work.